Hello, happy Wednesday, everyone. I hope everyone is enjoying this sunny spring day. Welcome to PCAP's Native Prairie Speaker Series. My name is Mroz, and I am the Stewardship Coordinator with Saskatchewan Prairie Conservation Action Plan, or PCAP. Every month, PCAP asks someone to present either in the form of a webinar or an in-person talk in a Saskatchewan community on anything to do with native prairie conservation or species at risk. Check out the PCAP website for more information about past and upcoming speaker series. Today, Leila Benmerrouche, Applied Research Associate at Saskatchewan Polytechnic, will be talking about harnessing technology, unmanned aerial vehicles for natural resource management. I would like to take a moment to note that financial support for today's webinar is provided by Environment and Climate Change Canada, Eco-Friendly Sask, Information Services Corporation, Ranchers Stewardship Alliance Inc., SaskTel, and Wildlife Habitat Canada. In-kind support for today's webinar has been given by Saskatchewan Polytechnic. A reminder to all of our listeners out there, if you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to type it into the question section of the webinar dashboard at any time during the presentation. Questions will be answered at the end of the webinar. Now, a bit about our presenter. Leila Benmerrouche is an Applied Research Associate with a Diploma in Integrated Resource Management and Geographic Information Science from Saskatchewan Polytechnic. Leila is involved with several applied research initiatives, including the development of UAV technology in combination with GIS and landscape modeling applications. And I'll turn it over to Leila.
Good afternoon. My name is Leila, and I'm here to talk to you about harnessing technology and using UAVs for natural resource management. All right. So to get started, I just want to share with you what we are about. We're a part of Polytechnics Canada, so we recently became a part of the Polytechnic group. So it's a very small community, as you can see on the map here. Throughout Canada, there's only about a handful of us. But becoming a Polytechnic also required us to have a mandate for applied research. So that's kind of what started this whole ball rolling. So just an overview of what the presentation is going to be about. Sorry, I'll hide that. So I want to go over some regulatory information about using UAVs for resource management, or just using a UAV generally. I'm also going to go over the systems that we've purchased, all of the sensors that we have as well, and some of our most recent projects that we've recently finished or are still working on. However, there's a lot more that I'm going to mention today, but we're limited for time. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is regulatory information. So UAV use in Canada is regulated by Transport Canada. So this is extremely important because you don't want to be doing research illegally. It's definitely not a good look. So there's a lot of legal channels to go through in order to actually provide UAV research, especially with our variety of systems. It's made it extremely difficult to apply for SFOCs and other regulatory requirements. Okay, so flight regulations and rules. So there's a lot of proposed changes coming up because UAVs have become more popular in the province and throughout Canada. So here's the proposed rules. I'll actually minimize this for a second here. We've got the proposed rules here. So it's kind of much easier to digest than it was before. Before it was just a wall of text. So now we've got small drone operators, limited operators in rural communities, and complex operators in urban communities. So there's these nice little portions of information for you to kind of look at if you're wanting to start up some kind of UAV endeavor. On top of that, there's a difference between operating for recreation or commercial. So we're operating under commercial because we're actually a part of research or work. Recreational means you're flying just for the thrill of flying. There's also a fact sheet available for commercial operations, and commercial operations have a list of rules and exemptions to fly under. So I'll show you that in a second too. So there's a lot of information you need to know before you have permission to fly. So here's kind of a little snippet from Transport Canada saying, hey, this is a flowchart you can follow, and this is how you can operate or how you cannot operate. So this is particularly for worker research. So we primarily operate within 25 kilograms to 1 kilogram. So we do have a special flight operator's card, or SFOC, which allows us to operate in areas that recreational flyers or other non-certificate holding flyers could operate in. So if you're operating under an exemption, with a UAV that's less than 1 kilogram, there are 43 conditions that you have to appease before actually operating. If you're operating a drone between 1 kilogram and 25 kilograms, there are 61 conditions. So I'll show you a little bit of information about that. So here is the commercial operators exemptions for 1 to 25 kilograms. So this is in the CARS, or the Canadian Aviation Regulations. So as you can see here, there's quite a bit of information that you need to go over before actually operating your UAV. So here we go, right down to the 61st requirement. However, if you want to just do it quick and easy, there's this file here that they created. Do I qualify under the UAV exemptions for worker research? So it's a nice little easily digested, colorful document that kind of helps you go through the regulations without having to read that block of text. However, I would suggest always reading the text before operating a UAV, because it's very important to know how you're operating and if you're operating legally. Okay, so now to talk a little bit about our fleet of drones. So we have 4 types of UAVs, which allows us to conduct a variety of different projects. With this selection, we can actually provide a multitude of research questions and answers. So it's nice having different crafts because they all kind of operate within a certain niche in natural resources. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the SenseFly IDI. So it's a fixed wing aircraft. It allows for longer flight time. However, it doesn't allow vertical takeoff and landing, or VTOL. So that's kind of limiting as far as operating in really thick forested environments. You can't just take off where you're standing. You actually have to have some form of runway. Although the best thing about the SenseFly IDI, it being a fixed wing, is it's great for documenting large areas. So this particular craft can fly 20 to 40 hectares in a single flight. So huge, huge areas documented with this craft. Another great thing about it is it literally flies itself. If you try and operate it in manual mode, it actually voids your warranty. So it's very interesting in that sense. Although it's very easy to fly, it comes with its own proprietary software called eMotion 3, which pretty much flies everything for you. All you have to draw a square on the map, say, hey, this is the area I'm interested in, and let it take off and do its thing. A good thing about this craft as well is it has multiple payloads or multiple cameras that you can easily switch out. So it's got the NIR, near-infrared, RGB, red, green, blue, and multispectral, or MSS camera. The next one is kind of a commercial grade. We actually own 2 of these, the DJI Phantom 4s. They're fantastic because they're low price, easy to use. Like I said, they're consumer grade, so super, super easy operation. Also, the camera is phenomenal. It can take 4K video and takes amazing still captures. So it's a fantastic craft just to have for you know, carrying around with you on any mission. So we usually take this out when we're doing stuff with our EB or other crafts or anything, just to kind of get an overview of the area. So here is the Dragonfly Commander. So this is a fantastic craft too. It's a rotary wing, so meaning kind of like the DJI Phantom. It's got propellers or rotors on the top of it, and it's able to do vertical takeoff and landing. The great thing about Dragonfly is that they're located right in Saskatoon, so I can't tell you how many times I've visited them. It's just a great little shop to see great guys and girls. So I really like Dragonfly. It has the ability to fly in -25 degree weather up to 38 degree weather. So fantastic. We actually just took it out not too long ago. In the winter, it was about minus 17 degrees and it flew flawlessly. So it's great to know that we have a craft like this that can operate in any condition. It also has a simultaneous dual payload system, meaning that it can have 2 payloads or 2 cameras on it at once and record with both of them. So this particular system has a thermal camera and an RGB camera, or red, green, blue camera. So we can go into the visible spectrum and into the thermal spectrum, which is great. And last but not least, we have our Freefly L26. So this system, as you can see in the picture here, it's quite huge. It actually has the ability to lift very heavy payloads. Lots of people in Hollywood actually use this particular craft for movie making because it's able to lift one of those heavier, very expensive cameras. One of the downsides, though, is it's completely manual. Like, you have to fly it like you would fly a recreational plane, for example. Like, it comes with a consumer-grade controller, which can sometimes be a little complicated. The learning curve is quite steep, but it still has the ability to carry our heaviest payload, which is the LiDAR system, and 2 cameras as well, which is an RGB and NAR. So fantastic for that. We can collect a lot of data in a short amount of time. So now moving on to our sensors. Okay, so we have 5 different sensors here. We've got an RGB camera, which is pretty much mounted on just about all of our systems. So the RGB, or red, green, blue camera, is great for mapping forests, wildlife habitat, and fantastic for multi-temporal comparisons. And 3D modeling, of course, as well. It's great for 3D modeling. We have our NIR camera, which is great for, or near-infrared camera, which is great for vegetation health, invasive species locating, and range management. And then we have our multispectral camera, which operates in 5 different bands, or 5 different wavelengths, which is great for just combining the RGB and NIR into one camera, so you only have to do one flight. We also have a thermal camera, which is great for wildlife movements, population surveys, search and rescue, and poaching operations, and LiDAR, which is forestry, canopy bulk density, fire fuel indices, slope stability, erosion, digital terrain and digital surface models, and so on. So with all of these sensors, we have a huge capability to document just about any kind of natural habitat or anything like that. All right, so this brings me on to the electromagnetic spectrum. This is just kind of like a brief overview so you know where we're kind of operating. So we've got most of our cameras operating within the visible light, so that's stuff that we can actually comprehend on our own. So the RGB being the red, green, blue being the visible light. And then we have the 2 cameras, the NIR and the thermal, which operate in the infrared spectrum. And the LiDAR actually operates also within the infrared spectrum. And the multispectral, as you can see, it kind of spans within the visible spectrum because it does collect RGB, or red, green, blue imagery, and additionally extra bands in the infrared spectrum. However, it does not collect thermal. Okay, so going over red, green, blue, this is an example data set that was taken at Redberry Lake, just, what is it, east of Hafford, Saskatchewan. So with this data set, this was all collected by the EB SenseFly in conjunction with an NIR data set. So this is fantastic because right now you just see the ortho mosaic. However, it can actually be seen in 3D, which I'll show you in just a minute here after. There we go. So this is just an example of what an RGB camera can do. So this is using our Phantom 4, and this is actually at our camp north, just north of Candle Lake. So we're flying above probably about 50 or 60 meters, but you can see the fine imagery that it collects. You can see quite a ways, so it's great even just for looking and trying to find features in an environment that you find interesting. As you can see in the corner there, that's our camp. And there's a couple of students walking around on the trail. So the 4K camera, just fantastic for baseline imagery. So here you can see Candle Lake. That creek there running into it is the Hanning Creek. So you can see it's very useful for reconnaissance. Okay, now we've got our near-infrared camera, which is used to see what our eyes can't. So there's actually, it's kind of funny that there's a lot of different species that can see in these spectrums. So we're quite limited as far as our eye is concerned. So this kind of data is particularly useful for indices, such as the NDVI, or Normalized Difference Vegetation Index. So lots of people know that one because it's used to see vegetation health. All right, and the next one, which combines the near-infrared and the RGB and 3 other bands, is the multispectral camera. So these are incredibly useful cameras just because you need one camera and it can capture all of that data. So we purchased the Sequoia multispectral camera, which has the 5 bands. You can see here below, we've got the green band, the near-infrared band, the red edge band, and the RGB band. So you can kind of look and see in all these pictures that there's a lot of difference between what shows up and what doesn't. So you can see in the near-infrared and the red edge band, that willow tree right in the middle there, it just is luminescent. It's incredibly bright, as opposed to in the red band and the green band. So it's just the difference between what light is absorbed and what light is reflected. So for a tree, for example, the near-infrared and the red edge will reflect or the tree will reflect that light, and you'll see it as much brighter. So that's why it's useful for these vegetation indices. Okay, so thermal. So one thing lots of people think is that thermal can see through things. Unfortunately, it can't. However, it can pick up heat signatures through objects. So here's an example of a thermal flight we did not too long ago. I'm going to skip through it because it's actually, as you can see, a 17-minute long video. Okay, so as you can see here, we have it in a rainbow spectrum, which is super handy. We also change it to a different spectrum, the red, the green. So it's nice because you can kind of change the palette to suit your needs. So now we have it in a rainbow palette. So you can see there's a person standing there. And this is winter. So we went out a couple weeks ago. So there was probably about 2 feet of snow. So it was difficult to walk around in, but it was very interesting to fly the thermal camera in because heat signatures appeared incredibly bright against the cold snow. So you can see the person walking around compared to the green and blue of the snow and the cold surfaces. You can see in the back here is a case. It's a black case, so you can see it's absorbing a lot of heat. And we're just about to take off here, and I'll show you a bit of the aerial imagery. So this is us flying, and you can actually get this information real time. This is using the Dragonfly Commander. So it's great. So if I'm looking for something or someone, I can fly this UAV in the air and locate it using the thermal imagery. So you can see there's quite a few hot spots. There's lots of cold spots. It's very great imagery to have. Okay, so moving on to LiDAR. So LiDAR is pretty much just a bunch of lasers being shot out from a sensor and then being returned and measured. So if I were to shoot a laser pointer at a wall and measure how long that light takes to get back to me, I'd be able to tell the distance. So that's pretty much how a LiDAR works. So it measures the return value of a laser emitted from its sensor. So the great thing about LiDAR is it has multiple returns. So our LiDAR system is the AL16, so it only has a dual return system. But it's still extremely handy because we can get pretty much X-ray quality data. So you can see in the image to the right here, it kind of shows you the first return, second return, third return, and last return, and the laser pulse. So what happens is the laser will shoot through the canopy, and anywhere the light can hit, so let's say there's a bunch of light going through this tree and hitting the ground, we're able to measure the ground value as well as the top of the canopy, the middle of the canopy, and the mid to ground area of the canopy. And then that all comes back to the sensor and it visualizes it like a point cloud, which I'll show you in just a second. The surface and ground, the surface minus the ground allows you to calculate total biomass, which is fantastic for any kind of forestry operations. You're able to tell how many trees you have and what's the volume of those trees without having to individually measure them. The LiDAR has also become quite popular in surveying because its ability to capture sub-centimeter, sub-millimeter accuracy depending on some systems. So here's an example of a tree that we captured right outside the school. So you can see the ground in the green there, and then the top of the tree in all red. So it pretty much is measuring or giving a point to every laser return it registers. So we've got the ground elevation, we've got you can see the trunk of the tree, you can see all the vegetation under it, et cetera, et cetera. So like you can see quite a bit of the tree with the LiDAR system. So on top of having just the elevation measurements and being able to see the ground, you can actually also see the intensity of the LiDAR, the intensity of the return. So the intensity means the hardness of the surface. So if I were to laser scan a brick wall, the return of the laser would be more strong than if I were to, let's say, scan a puddle, or sorry, not a puddle, a pile of dirt or something, because it's a softer material and absorbs more light. So you can see here, this is the front of the Saskatchewan Polytechnic campus in Prince Albert. So you can see the elevation here on the left, and then next to it on the right, you see the intensity. So they're both the same image of the same area. The great thing about LiDAR is you can scan an entire area in very little time and get sub-centimeter accuracy. So we actually ended up doing our entire school, which is quite substantial, in under 8 minutes. So one of the downsides of LiDAR, though, is that when you do scan these huge areas, you get millions upon millions upon millions of points. So it sounds great. However, it also means you have millions upon millions upon millions of points to process. And it's very hard to get a computer that can actually handle that kind of processing. Okay, so I'm going to show you after this video. This is our LiDAR in action here. So you can see it. This is real-time data. So another great thing about it is that when you're scanning an area, it gives you real-time feedback. So while we were driving around, we actually attached the LiDAR system to the back of a car and drove around the school. But you can see it's collecting those data points, and immediately after it's collected, it's telling me on my computer screen, hey, this is where these points are. So fantastic for visualizing what you're collecting and making sure you're collecting the right stuff. So yeah, you can see here it goes quite far. It has about 100-meter range, so you can hit points up to 100 meters away from the actual scanner itself. And the trees picked up quickly. Like, this is all real time. And here's the final data set. So if we were to fly over that, we would also get the ground measurements as well. Or sorry, the roof measurements, but we were on the ground, so we weren't able to collect that information. Okay, so before I show you this, I'm actually going to show you a quick data set in Pixord, which is the software we typically use for any kind of data management or 3D rendering. So this is kind of what it looks like after we've collected the data. This particular data set was collected using the EB SenseFly. So what it does is it flies transects up and down and collects photos at intervals along those transects. So here we've got over 100 photographs easily. This is on a highly, a very topographically challenging area because it's got these huge hills. It doesn't look like much here, but it's about 100 meters difference in relief. So this is just the tie point. So it's not even the entire point cloud image. So point cloud meaning a single point has an X, Y, and Z coordinate that's located within space. So if I were to turn off the cameras, you can kind of see what the tie points look like. So each tie point relates to a bunch of different photos saying, hey, this point is found in this picture, this picture, and this picture, and this picture. Let's make it a tie point because that's tying all of these different photographs together. So this is just the tie point map. So if I were to turn on the point map, it might take just a minute to load. Oh, there we go. So this is what the point cloud looks like. So after it densifies the point cloud, you get this wonderful, dense point cloud image that you can use for analysis, as well as topographic information. So on top of that, you can also make a triangle mesh, which kind of smooths everything out a little bit. So you end up with this nice orthomosaic image that you can use for just about any kind of GIS application. So fantastic imagery, you can collect it whenever you want, which is one of the bonuses of having a UAV. So instead of having to rely on satellite imagery, which is very spotty, no pun intended, you can go out and collect data the day you want to go out and collect data. And on top of that, you get a higher resolution. Of course, there's pitfalls because satellite imagery will collect more of an area. And that's kind of where UAVs are limited right now. However, if you kind of go over that 35 kilogram threshold into the larger fixed wing systems, more like military drone style, you're able to collect huge, huge land masses. Although we haven't quite got there yet, so we're working with our under 25 kilogram systems. But as you can see, it's not doing so bad. So we got this nice 3D data set. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about our research projects. So kind of what we're up to, and this is kind of more of just a highlight reel. I'm not going to share all of the projects that we're doing, but these are some of the more upfront ones. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the application of UAV-borne LiDAR and multispectral imaging for accurate classification of inventory in wetland vegetation. So that's quite a mouthful, but realistically, or sorry, to kind of put it in more layman's terms, what we did is we compared the classification of vegetation using a LiDAR system versus using just a regular UAV system with the 3D modeling. So we had a comparison study. As you can see here, here's a LiDAR point cloud of our van while we were out in Edmonton. We partnered with Fiera Biological Consulting out of Edmonton. We used our Freefly Alta with the LiDAR and a DJI Phantom 4 to collect some vegetation imagery. So like I said, we usually take out our DJI when we're going flying. And they were able to use their own Dragonfly XPS3, I believe. And we were able to capture a lot of imagery of all these wetlands. We actually ended up doing about 7 or 8 wetlands in total. And we classified them out using typical classification methods used in GIS. And we were able to identify vegetation types in each data set. So as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner here, we've got a classified data set of MAR1. So we have kind of code names for each wetland. And we took a lot of vegetation points. So we went out in the field, collected data saying, hey, this is this vegetation, et cetera, et cetera. And then we classified them based on these points and used the height of the LiDAR and classified out the vegetation type. And we did the exact same thing using the UAV or the photogrammetry or just photographic method. And we're able to compare them. The next project we did, we developed evidence tie point markers for Dragonfly out of Saskatoon. So what this is called, it's called a fiducial marker. It's used primarily in robotics for identifying objects optically, as opposed to just hoping that the camera is able to pick up stuff based on machine learning or telling it what object is what. So these are just kind of like notification tags for objects. So as you can see here, we've got our standard evidence tie point or evidence marker, and then we have our evidence tie point marker here. Here's just a photograph. It's just a little tent card with that binary black and white image or fiducial marker on it. And when we actually take pictures of it and render it, we get this high quality 3D model of the object. So it means like if you were an investigator, instead of just looking at two-dimensional photographs, you can actually walk through the scene and see what's going on, where the evidence is, etc. So in the bottom here, you can kind of see, here's a photograph. There's a bullet casing right in this bottom corner here. Not sure if you can see that, but I'll circle it. So we've got the yellow circle indicating that bullet casing. It's from a high-powered rifle, and then here you can see it in the 3D rendered image as the bullet casing again. So it's just a good way to kind of create three-dimensional scenes and make it a lot easier and a lot more available to anybody to actually create these wonderful 3D models. So just an example of what a fiducial marker actually is. So I just got this video. I'm pretty sure it's viral now. If you haven't seen this hockey stick robot, it's actually quite sad. So this is a robot that was developed in Boston. So amazing, first of all, that it can walk on snow. I know robotics have had a huge struggle trying to get robots to even stand upright. So as you can see in the top here, he's using a LiDAR system to locate the boxes. So you can see it spinning up there. That's usually what a LiDAR system looks like. And here are the fiducial markers. So these markers allow the robot to identify the box and where it is. See, it's kind of sad watching this poor robot suffer. However, this is leaps and bounds for the robotics community. And as you can see here again, here's the fiducial markers on the door. So the robot can locate where that handle is, where the door boundaries are, etc., etc. All right. Okay, so after we developed these 3D these fiducial markers for Dragonfly, it actually ended up leading to another project, which allowed us to work with conservation officers. So we helped create or completely render crime scenes using these fiducial markers as evidence markers. And then we also were able to take aerial imagery and combine the two without having to work too hard to do it. So just about anyone can do this. So as you see here, here's one of our data sets. This is the aerial imagery that we took. So you can see the grid pattern using the Dragonfly Commander. And then at the bottom, we took a pattern, like, as you can see here, kind of circling around the object. And then we were able to, so here in the bottom here, you can't see it, but there's actually, unfortunately, a moose carcass. So we circled the moose carcass using this pattern, and we're able to tie it into the aerial imagery. So that gives us the aerial imagery combined with the detailed ground imagery, which kind of gives officers a perspective, but without losing any of the detail from the scene itself. So one of the bonus things about doing this kind of research, we were recently published in the Western Canadian Game Warden magazine. So if you're around, feel free to pick up a copy. So we were able to help a conservation officer out of Saskatchewan catch a poacher from Alvina. I'm not sure if you heard about this story, but unfortunately there was a moose and a calf poached just outside of Alvina, Saskatchewan. Very sad story, but we were able to go out there and fly the area, help them find out where the tire tracks were, where the cow was, or sorry, where the moose was going, and with the help of the imagery, they were able to catch the perp and find him as well. So one of the great things about this is it's kind of getting the use of UAVs out there. This particular story was able to reach over 600,000 people, so that was kind of a win in our books. But yeah, I would definitely suggest picking up the story. It's made by Chris Meyer. It's a great story about, well, a happy ending kind of story, I guess. Okay, so the next one we have here, it's actually an ongoing project, so we're still working on it. We've got a couple of data sets generated. Actually, a student here at Saskatchewan Polytechnic is working on this project right now. So what we did is we went down to Old Man on His Back Heritage Site, which is in southwest Saskatchewan, so the very, very southwest corner of Saskatchewan. And we were able to fly different areas. So at the top here, you can kind of see these are the locations that we flew. So we actually only flew the middle 4 squares of each data set. So we actually each area of interest. So that was, out of the 6 areas, we flew 12 flights. We did once with the RGB and second with the NIR camera. And we're able to create a lot of different data products using this information. So here is an example of the EB flight path. Oh, goodness. So you can see here the transects, or how the EB was flying, and these white dots here are photographs taken by the EB. So you can see it's pretty linear, very straight lines, and what it does is it ties these images together and creates an orthomosaic photo, where it mosaics all the pictures together to create one giant picture. We also have these vegetation samples, compliments of the University of Saskatchewan. They were able to give us their vegetation points. We're actually helping them out. This is their project, fantastic project, really bringing a whole lot of groups together, including Nature Conservancy Canada and all the ranchers around the area. It's fantastic as far as community is concerned. So we're also taking this vegetation points that were provided, and we're hopefully going to be interpolating them. This still is in the works, but it's going to be very interesting once it's complete. So with this information, we're able to tell, or say to the computer, this is what vegetation is here. Now let us know what else is in this entire area. Figure it out. So here are some of the data sets that we collected. So we've got the RGB, the visual spectrum, the near-infrared, and here's an example of an NDVI. So here you can see red is kind of bad, green meaning good. Although not technically to that sense, green meaning that there's more reflectance from the near-infrared spectrum. So it's typical to say it's good because it's reflecting the chlorophyll of plants. So in particular, this valley, this is quite a low elevation. So it's kind of saying, hey, there's a lot of green around here. That's kind of typical of these valleys because there's more moisture running through them. So it's very interesting to have these maps. It's very easy to digest the information. You can kind of see immediately, like, hey, green's good, red, less moisture, less chlorophyll, not so great. Keep in mind this was also done in 35-degree weather, so there's not a lot of moisture, not a lot of very green, lush vegetation. Okay, so here is the Red Berry Lake Riparian Health Assessment. So this was a pilot project we did a while ago, a couple of years ago actually. The reason why I'm bringing it up is because it's led to other projects at the Red Berry Lake biosphere. So this initial project, we were just trying to find how well our sensors could pick up riparian health. So that's actually ongoing, and now we've gone and done 8 more missions in the area and plan to do 4 or 5 more in the coming year. So what we're doing is we're classifying the land out for different species at risk in the area, and we're also providing maps for researchers in the area, because this is actually a part of a larger project, a habitat stewardship project that the Red Berry Lake Biosphere Reserve is putting on. So we were able to use the EB SenseFly for this with the RGB and NIR cameras again, just because it's able to collect those huge data sets. So this area is gigantic. So even with the 8 missions, we've only covered about half of it. So there's a lot left to do there, and we're going to be getting to it this year. And here is the MOTIS telemetry project. So this is kind of a bit different from the others, where we're collecting imagery and analyzing it. This is more of using drones as a bird instead of as a data collection vehicle. So the MOTIS telemetry project was done just north of Chaplin. You can see here, this is Chaplin, Saskatchewan. So most of our research was done at the Havergate Tower, so just north of Chaplin. So what we did is we attached a radio telemetry receiver onto a UAV. So these telemetry receivers are used to locate birds, insects, bats, just about anything, and tell the tower when these animals or wildlife is passing by. So nobody really knows exactly how precise these towers are at picking up these tags, or what the distance is from the tower that they can actually pick up. So what we did is we attached one of these radio receivers to one of our UAVs and flew at different locations surrounding the Havergate Tower to find out what the range was and how topography actually affected the signal pickup. So it's very interesting. We flew a whole bunch of different locations. Usually in this, you can see in the bottom here, kind of like a plus sign pattern, just so we could cover all of the potential flight patterns and rotations, etc. Fantastic project because it was great to be down south. As you can see in this picture at the bottom here, just beautiful, stunning views. So this is a great project too because we're able to use the DJI Phantom, which is super easy to fly, so we were able to hit quite a few locations around the Havergate Tower. Okay, and this is actually just something, one of the more interesting student projects that came out of the GIS, or Geographic Information Science class, a couple of years ago. So we were able to fly a UAV over the Saskatchewan Heritage Park. So that was one of the times that we required to have an SFOC, because we were working within 5 nautical miles of the Saskatoon Airport. So what the student did here is we collected the imagery. So you get this beautiful mosaic image. And what she did is she classified out known locations of the European buckthorn. And with that information, she extrapolated throughout the entire data set, and we're able to locate potential areas where the buckthorn might be. So as you can kind of see, like, UAVs have a lot of potential uses in natural resources. And I mean, we're just kind of scratching the surface here, just general projects, but there's a whole lot more to uncover with UAVs for natural resource management. So I'm looking forward to continuing this research in all aspects. I mean, from conservation law, invasive species, telemetry, like, there's just a variety of different things we can do. So with that, our research continues. And if there's any questions, you have my contact information.
Thank you very much, Leila. That was a great presentation. To all of our listeners out there, if you have any questions, please feel free to type it into the question section of the webinar dashboard. And there is a question here. It says, "Hi, Leila. This is Romaine from France. Thanks for your nice presentation. I am really interested in how new technologies as satellite imagery could help ranchers and land managers improve resources management. Do you know someone developing applications to do so in Canada?" And he'd be happy to connect with them. Thanks.
You know, that's interesting, actually. There's a company that we met at a UAV conference a while ago. I think their name was EarthCast. They're doing a lot of fine imagery, so they're collecting sub-meter imagery. Like, as far as ranching is concerned, most of the time people are working with Landsat, which is, 15 to 30 meters. So it's very coarse data, but having this, fine, at least sub-meter, like, you're able to kind of collect and, analyze finer information. There's also a lot of studies here as far as agriculture is concerned with UAVs. It's just starting to ramp up here in the province. I'm not sure about Canada-wide, though, unfortunately.
Thank you. One of our listeners is also wondering about the cost of UAVs. And are you able to get funding or financial support for them?
Actually, we acquired all of our UAVs through Western Economic Diversification funding. To be honest with you, UAVs used to be extraordinarily expensive, and now that they're becoming more streamlined and mainstream too, the prices have dropped substantially. Like, we bought the EB for over $30,000, and now you can buy an EB for about 10. So, and there's definitely funding out there.
Can you say the name of the funding that you received again? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Western Economic Diversification funding.
Great, thank you. One of our listeners named Michael would like to know if you have observations of wildlife responses to drone activities, and if so, which species seem to be more sensitive?
We haven't actually flown over any wildlife. One thing I do know, one of our a faculty here, he has a bison farm just north of the city, and I believe he flew a drone near it and they just lost it. So bison do not do well with drones. Although some other like birds, not great with drones because they like to attack them. But other than, macrofauna, deer or anything, we haven't actually seen any.
Okay, cool, thank you. Have you been required to get permits to fly drones in any special areas or protected areas?
We actually haven't had the need to do that yet, although I know it's possible to get a special flight operator certificate for just about any kind of mission. It's just a matter of asking, really.
Okay, thank you. One of our listeners would like to know, how hard is it to learn how to operate a drone?
This is going to sound kind of funny, but if you play video games or have that kind of eye-hand coordination, it's not hard at all. There's a huge learning curve with the sensors and operating some of the larger systems. Like, for example, the LiDAR system has about 4 or 5 connections going at all times. So like the computer, the corrections, the LiDAR system, the actual craft itself, like it's just crazy. But I mean, it's learnable. You can definitely learn, and lots of people that sell drones at that level will have training courses associated with it.
Great, thanks. A listener named Landon would like to know, have you used point cloud data from the DJI RGB imagery to estimate vegetation height? And if so, how?
We actually have never done any scientific stuff at the DJI. I just know it can do that, actually. We did a forest scene a little while ago, and it's fairly accurate, but I mean, of course, with anything consumer grade, there's definitely some error in it. And if you were to estimate vegetation height using the DJI, what I would suggest is taking ground measurements, because when you do the 3D rendering, it's going to give you just the surface model as opposed to the elevation model. So you'll need to have those elevation values in order to make vegetation height calculations.
Okay, thank you. Landon, hopefully that answers your question there. That looks like all the questions we have at the moment. So I'd just like to remind our listeners that when you leave this presentation, there'll be a quick questionnaire that'll pop out. If you don't mind filling it out, it'll just take a minute. And this information is used for our funders so we can keep our webinars going into the future. I'd also like our listeners to know that a recording of this webinar will be uploaded to the PCAP YouTube channel later today or tomorrow, and that's www.youtube.com/user/skpcap. A listener named Lucas would like to know, what was your wetland vegetation classification accuracy, and what wavelengths did you use of the classification?
To be honest with you, I don't remember the exact number. Although for the data sets themselves, we did have some issues with tilt in the photogrammetry-based data sets. So that kind of threw off the accuracy a little bit, but I can't even guesstimate the number. And the wavelengths we were using, just a typical NIR camera. It was the MicaSense. Sorry, we actually didn't collect the RGB and NIR data. That was Fiera Consulting that did. But they used the MicaSense multispectral camera to collect the data. And I know you can find that information online. I just can't think of it right now. I'm sorry.
Thanks, Leila. There's a comment here from a listener named Kaina. Very interesting, and thank you, Leila, she says. So thanks for that.
Thanks.
Yeah, well, it looks like that's all the questions we have. So with that, I would just like to thank our, oh, actually, sorry, I spoke too soon. A listener named Landon would like to know, have you You used the Calculate DTM option in Pix 4D.
Sorry, I didn't catch any of that. It kind of just crackled out a bit there. Could you say that again?
Have you used the Calculate DTM option in Pix 4D?
Honestly, I've never tried it. Just because we have ArcGIS Pro, which is what we normally use to estimate, well, DTM. Do you mean DEM?
He put down DTM, but Landon, if you're there, could you specify? Maybe it's a typo on his end.
Okay. I think there's just a tool in there that's like calculate the elevation, I guess terrain. Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't think of it right now. But I've never actually used the tool myself.
Okay, he said it calculates a DTM from the DSM.
A terrain model from the surface model? Actually, that does make sense. Yeah, no, I haven't used it. Yeah, like I said, we use ArcGIS Pro for most of our analysis. So it also has some tools like that allows us to calculate different things.
Okay.
It would be nice to try, though.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks, Leila. Hopefully that answers your question, Landon. Well, thank you, Leila, for the really interesting presentation. I know I learned a lot. This is such a new, innovative field, and it has great potential for the field of conservation. So hopefully our listeners out there learned a thing or two as well. And I would like to thank you again for the presentation and wish you the best of luck with your upcoming field season and all the projects that you have on the go. So thank you, Leila, and thanks to all of our listeners out there for tuning in.
Well, thanks for having me. This was great.
Have a great rest of your day, everyone. Bye.
Bye.